Welcome to Scary Stories. Usually when people tell werewolf or dogman stories, they're talking about the scariest things they ever saw in their life. That's because that's usually what dogman is. But every once in a while, we get some stories that don't fit the mold. Some of these people claim they've been able to forge bonds with dogmen, in the way others might with their beloved family dogs. Some people love these stories, while others say it's impossible for a dogman to be nice. In the spirit of hearing both sides of the argument, we've got two never-before-heard stories of friendly dogmen. Or are they friendly werewolves? In this show, we've got a story entitled, I Am Friends with a Werewolf. But before we get to that one, we've got this interesting email which the author has entitled, I Met a Friendly Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, have you ever had a personal experience with a cryptid? Most people find it traumatic. We don't know if everyone always gets away from some of these beasts. I've heard terrible things about dogmen and werewolves, some of them on your channel. So I admit that I had always been scared of the idea of meeting one of these creatures. Well, I once met a werewolf or a dogman that was very helpful to me during a rough patch of my life. Much of what happened still confuses me, but I'll try to tell you the most honest version of events that I can manage. Some of it I'm still guessing at, even years later, so I don't want to insist on just one way of interpreting what happened to me. I'm a man who was forced to divorce my first wife because she and her boyfriend were abusing me, stealing from me, and so on. I had been traumatized by some of the violence I suffered, and so I was on a leave of absence from my job to get my head back together. One of the several doctors I was seeing suggested I go camping with a friend to get away from civilization. My ex-wife took all my friends in the divorce though, so I decided to go camping alone. I did not bring a cell phone with me since every single one of my contacts at the time would have been painful for me to speak to or hear from, and I wanted a real break from the world. So where I went was the Ottawa National Forest in autumn. It kind of sounds like it's in Canada, but it's in the United States in northern Michigan. This is the part of Michigan that's connected to northern Wisconsin. There's a lot of nature up there, and the stories of the dogman and werewolves go back to the old lumberjack days. That was the last thing on my mind, to be honest. I was miserable and unhappy, and I just wanted to empty my head and remember what it was like to breathe in and out, and to take care of myself. Once I remembered how to be me again, then I could try to reintegrate myself into the human world somewhere. That was about all the thinking I had put into it. I knew I needed a break from human beings, that was for sure. In that forest they have black bear, but one morning I saw what I thought was a brown bear, or possibly a grizzly, walking along the tree line. That alarmed me because they shouldn't be there, so I got out my binoculars. Well, that was the weirdest looking bear I'd ever seen. It was skinny around the belly, but it had muscular arms. I couldn't tell if it was emaciated or in extra good shape. And then it stood up and snatched a bird from a branch to toss in its mouth. And I realized that thing's paws were closer to monkey hands than to bear claws. I mean, they were clawed like a bear, but it was able to grab that bird, which meant it had a thumb or something like it. I watched that creature walk around for about 5 minutes, until it got too deep into the woods for me to see it anymore, and I kind of forgot about it. At around noon, I was tossing my old baseball way up in the air and catching it with my old Denny McLean model baseball glove. It was challenging to see the ball with the sun right overhead, and I was able to get lost in childish fantasies about being an outfielder in the major leagues, trying to make an important play in spite of the sun being in his eyes. I heard what sounded like a dog whimpering, and I tried to see what was making the noise. But at first my eyes had spots in front of them because of the game I was playing with the baseball. Impatient with me, the source of the whimpering bounded up, holding a squirrel in its teeth, then dropped the squirrel at my feet. Then the huge furry creature made itself small, huddled down on all fours, and it whimpered at me some more. This was the thing I had been wondering about before. Was it a brown bear? Was it a grizzly? No, it was neither. It was the Michigan Dogman, and it just made an offering to me of a dead squirrel. Why? Why was it treating me as the alpha? The Dogman barked loudly and nudged my baseball lying on the ground with its nose. Did it want me to throw the ball in the air for it? I couldn't figure out what else it could have been asking me for, so I threw the ball as high up as I could manage, and the huge canine squealed and ran off after the ball, diving for it, and making a great catch with his immense jaws, landing on the grass with a belly flop. I laughed and applauded, and he ran back to me happily. It looked like he was chewing on my baseball, though, and then it looked like he swallowed it. He came back and sat before me expectantly, as though he expected me to have a second old baseball from my childhood to throw into the air for him to swallow. After he started barking loudly at me, I got a big tree branch and we played with that instead of the baseball. This time, when he caught up with the branch, he sat down immediately and began eating it as though it were a bone. At least he broke it apart in that way. I hope he wasn't actually swallowing the wood, though who knows. I did once know a dog that ate wood when I was growing up, so it is not impossible. We played until my dinner time. I shared a wiener with him, and then he wandered off into the dark forest. It was a fun day, and I was grateful to have had the experience. I thought that was the end of it, but the next day, as I packed up camp to go hiking and find some new campsite, the Dogman showed up and pranced around as I packed up. He seemed to know what I was doing, and I wondered if he had befriended other campers and hikers in the past. So I spent about a week and a half with this Dogman as my hiking companion. That part of the world is full of secret waterfalls. They're just every place. And the Dogman would lead me to one of them at noontime each day. We'd wash up during the warmest part of the day, and I'd have time to dry off before it started to get chilly again. We never had one single day when it was sunny all the way through, but he and I enjoyed what sun we got. There were some days that were just so rainy I stayed in my tent and slept. But when walking was possible, I hiked. And I was surprised to find each time that the Dogman would pick up the walk with me at some point or another. He wouldn't always arrive before I left, but he'd always catch up to me. We shared food, but honestly he shared more with me than I shared with him. This was not a Dogman who liked deer meat, or at least I never saw him eating it, or stalking a deer. He mainly seemed to like fish, which there were a lot of that autumn. We would fish in the mornings, sometimes instead of hiking, and have fish for lunch and for dinner. He liked it as much raw as he did cooked, and I made jokes with him about how he preferred sushi, but I had never developed a taste for it. We were lucky with our fishing, and we always had too much to eat. It was an entire month of Thanksgiving, it really was. By our last few days together, we had become close enough that I would give him the biggest hug I could manage, after we would finish our branch-throwing exercises before dinner. The hug meant I was too tired to play anymore, and I needed to cook something for dinner. He came to be happy with the hug, as it meant I'd be making food that we would share. I had planned to be out there for one day longer than I actually was. I wasn't watching where I was going, and I slipped on some rocks. I twisted up my ankle and I fell down a steep incline about 5 or 8 feet and banged myself up a little further. I could sort of stand gingerly, but I couldn't really walk, and that made me very scared. I was in the middle of nowhere. I had chosen that place because of how remote it was. Now I wasn't going to survive, because I had wanted some privacy. Life seemed a little unfair to me, and I was at a standstill. The Dogman knew just what to do, though. He picked me up and threw me over his shoulder like I was a sack of potatoes. Then he started running, upright, like a man, taking huge bouncing strides that took my breath away over and over again. It was not a comfortable ride. I eventually passed out, but I woke up when I felt something big and hard whack me in the back, from the top of my head down my back to my ankles and heels. I opened my eyes to see what that was, and I realized it had been the ground coming up, or rather me falling down. I was looking up at the sky. I didn't see my Dogman friend, but that sun was sure bright and blinding in my eyes. Some people came and put me on a stretcher, but I had spots in front of my eyes and I didn't really get good looks at them. I woke up in a hospital room. They told me I had been dehydrated, but that I was fine. My ankle was banged up and in a cast, but none of my other cuts even required one stitch. When I asked to thank who had carried me in, no one seemed to know who it was. When I asked about my Dogman friend, they eyed me with a wild surmise. I insisted it had been my Dogman friend who had carried me to the hospital, and they merely reminded me that I had been severely dehydrated. The general consensus was that I must have walked there under my own power, and that I must have hallucinated the Dogman. But I was out there for 10 days with that Dogman, and I don't see how I could have had a hallucination that lasted for that long. I also don't see how I could have found all those fishing spots and waterfalls without him guiding me. Most of all, I don't see how I could have made it to the hospital on my own. I had no idea where I was, and I had no cell phone with me. But I don't think what happened to me was a hallucination at all. I met a friendly Dogman. Story number 2. I am friends with a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have been friends with a werewolf since the pandemic. I no longer trust anybody with his location, and I'm going to have to try to keep this anonymous. But I'd like to share some stories about the big guy and me. I actually call him Biggie, but I know that's your Bigfoot's nickname, so to avoid confusing your regular viewers, I'll call my big guy Fido. I actually do use that name sometimes. It gives me a lol. This is not going to be one of those stories about a creepy and scary Dogman. No, this Dogman is actually pretty nice if you want to get real for a minute. But I am not a nice person, and I enjoy having muscle the size of the Dogman. I say muscle, but I think people might be more afraid of his claws and teeth than his muscle. As long as they fear him, I'm cool with that. I use him to intimidate others. He's the most loyal friend I've ever had, and the most useful too. He'll do anything I say. It's incredible. One time this girl annoyed me, and I told my Dogman to mess her up. He stood up right away and walked toward her. I think he was really gonna do it too. She screamed so high-pitched that I saw his dog ears twitching in pain. I was laughing my ass off. I made him stop before he hurt her, but that girl never messed with me ever again. She knew that Dogman would not have any second thoughts about eating her alive, if that's what I asked it to do. She sometimes does jobs for me still. Hell, she'll do anything I ask her to do, just as long as I don't sick Big Fido on her. But for the most part, I like to keep my Dogman friend a secret. He isn't supposed to be real after all, but there are times when it serves a purpose to introduce the big guy to people in my life. For instance, people who owe me money and are getting behind in their payments. Those are good people to introduce to Fido. He always makes such a big first impression, as I bet you can imagine. This creature worships the ground I walk on, and it can take a deer down with one bite. I'm not saying that randomly. I saw the thing do exactly that last Christmas. I had a couple of my kids from different marriages over for Christmas, and it was snowing out back, so this was a real family moment. A memory for the kids to cherish, and think back on in their older years. And as if things couldn't get any more perfect, this young adult deer walked out into my snowy backyard. Everyone was like, "Aw," and the kids were like, "That's Bambi, Daddy," and I was feeling really good about how great a father I was being for the brats when all of a sudden, Fido races into the picture, snaps Bambi's neck with one bite, and darts back off into the woods with the deer in its teeth. Well, you would have thought the Hindenburg was on fire again with the way those kids were screaming and crying. And some of the adults were worse than the kids. For some reason, when I cursed them all out and told them to shut up, it only made them cry harder. And I had to have some of the boys drive all my guests home before I got a migraine. I was pretty angry with Big Fido for traumatizing those kids, and I was gonna tell him that too. But the next morning when I woke up and went outside to pick up my newspaper, I stepped right into a dead raccoon. I had to throw out those slippers and it took an hour to wash that smell off my foot. But how am I supposed to get mad at a dogman that leaves me its dead raccoons? I mean, that's a lot of good eating it gave up, just to tell me that it loves me. Would any of my ungrateful, weepy, whiny kids ever kill a raccoon and leave me the corpse? Yeah, I highly doubt that day will ever come. Now, obviously, there are some topics concerning my close dogman friend which I can't discuss publicly. Have I used him as a hired assassin to take out my competition? I don't know. How would I know? But what I can tell you is that Big Fido is a living educational tool. When people are ignorant of how important it is to pay me back on time, Big Fido provides them with a college-level education on the subject. And it won't take them 4 years to complete those courses. Trust me, he works better than a baseball bat to the kneecaps when you have to give someone an attitude adjustment. Sometimes when people give me a hard time, I find that they just seem to disappear shortly afterward. I would ask Fido if he knew anything about it, but you know that Dogman can't talk. Not that he would, even if he could. This mutt is loyal. Speaking of that, I don't know what breed or mix of breeds he is. When I brought in a vet to do a blood sample of him, Fido made short work of that vet. Don't worry. We paid for the guy's funeral. We aren't uncivilized. Really, the only trouble with Fido is that you can't keep him caged, and he doesn't like to stay in one location for too long. If I feed him, he eats all of it, but then he still goes out to hunt anyway. Maybe he just does it to stay in practice. He seems to stay somewhere near me most of the time, but he's also able to evade my security cameras almost as though he were a ghost. I don't even know how he does that. Sometimes people look at me strangely when I talk about the Dogman. I know they think I'm just imagining him. I don't mind though. Let them keep thinking that. This way they have their guard down if I ever need to send Fido over there to pay them a little visit. Now, it's my personal opinion that Fido used to be some person, maybe a person from my own past. Possibly he really is something like a ghost, or the reincarnation of one of my ancestors who wants to look out for me, you know? I've never seen him change back to human, so I don't know who he really is under all that fur. He looks just like an animal to me, though. He doesn't look like he was ever a human being at all. But whatever Fido really is in actuality, he is my good and loyal friend. More loyal than anyone since my own ma. And that's why I'm telling you, I am friends with a werewolf. Real wolfmen, true encounters in modern America. A lot of the stories we run on this channel are supposed to be true, but it's not like I have budget or time to look into any of the claims made. Someone who made her living looking into Dogman claims, though, was the late great Linda Godfrey. If you like the stories on this show, then you should check out this incredible audiobook from Linda called Real WOLFMEN, True Encounters in Modern America. Glinda goes back to the 1930s and tells a number of the better researched Dogman and werewolf stories of the 20th and 21st centuries. It's a great overview of the subject matter, whether you're new to it or even if you think you know all the stories. It's available in audiobook, audio CD, paperback, or Kindle forms at the address in the description for this video. The audiobook is over 8 hours and is probably the best deal there. Plus, if you use the link in the description, supposedly you're helping us out here in some way that I'm still learning about. And now here's your old pal Bigfoot with an important message about today's executive producer. We say thanks to Godzilla Tim more solemnly than a church hymn. Please join me in thanking Godzilla Tim Walker in Ireland for not only joining the channel twice, but then donating £5 British on top of that. This man has gone above and beyond to support us for a really long time now, and I wish we could do a whole lot more for him in return. Thank you, Godzilla Tim. You are one of the main reasons we're still here, and I don't know how to thank you for your contributions along the way. And if any of the rest of you would like to be as well loved and highly thought of as Godzilla Tim in Great Britain, then just give a listen to what this next little guy has to say. Henry? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.